Hello, I'm Ben. Welcome to the channel. So in line with some of the things we've talked about before, when we talked about the C-suite at a business, we're going to talk now about some functionality on investments and return. Okay? So the three things we're going to talk about today, and you can see in the thumbnail, if you want to have that, go ahead and take a picture of that thumbnail, and that way you can expand it and see the information that I'm going through right now. So you got return on investment, return on equity, and return on assets. And each one of these things is different and measured in different ways. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go column by column. I'm going to go very quickly because you're going to have this as the thumbnail. So you can review this at your leisure. But I just want to share this on the channel because this is the kind of stuff we dig and the kind of stuff we want to get out there, right? So return on investment measures the investment profitability by relating investment gain or loss to the total investment. And it's got some functions here around the formulas. ROI equals the net profit over the investment times 100. That gives you a percentage. And ROI equals the EBIT or EBITDA minus tax in investment over investment times 100. So that's EBITDA. That's what that ROI is there. So look at that. The formulas are on the deal. You can take a look at that on the thumbnail. When comparing the efficiency or profitability of different investments, you look at an ROI as a metric. So you can determine which one's more profitable, which one has the highest return. And that's one of the times when I'm talking to companies and consulting around certain things, excuse me. Not a sponsor of the channel, should be. I talk to them about the profitability, okay? Sometimes bigger is not better. If you have an investment that produces a great number of profit for a low amount of cost, it's safe and it's replicatable, that might make a lot more sense than doing something that's big and elaborate, because less effort that puts off more profit makes sense. Now, how do you replicate that situation where you can have more of the less effort opportunities to increase your investment, or a return on investment rather? So just something to think about from an operational standard. It doesn't have to be bigger is better. Could be that small is great and do that many times and now it's bigger. Okay, that's how you do that. You replicate the small to be bigger. It doesn't have to get out of line. There's a certain method of thought in one of these books. I forget which one. I want to say, I don't remember at the moment. But in the book it talked about, it was the one with the match on the front of it. I'll think about it. Breaking point or turning point or something like that. Anyway, in that book, it said that once a business reaches 150 people, that you need to separate the locations, and you don't need to go to 151, because at 151, the culture changes. 151 is big enough to have clicks where 150 is not. 151 is a situation where people don't know everyone they work with, where 150 is not. Seems silly, but the line of reasoning was there, and there was a lot of historical documentation about that. So it's called the turning point. And there was that story in there about the 150, and there was a story in there about how the police turned the crime situation around in New York City after the 70s and 80s, which were extremely violent and awful, which everyone forgets these days when they talk about safety and all that jazz. But they did it very significantly. What they did was they went in and said, we're not going to allow these small things, because if you attack the small stuff, the big stuff won't happen. And that was extremely effective. So yeah, it's a little off topic here on return on investment, but it's something that stood out. So read that book if you get a chance. It's called The Turning Point. It was interesting. So basically, ROI is a metric to use so you can tell what the best investment opportunity is, because of the return that you expect based on the historical numbers. So it's simple to understand. It's widely used and directly shows profitability. It does not take into account the time value of money, the investment time frame, and not accurately reflect the total return if there are ongoing costs. So that's something worth knowing. That's kind of the small print around ROI, and it doesn't reflect complexities like risks, opportunity cost, or the impact of inflation. I would say that number one, around opportunity cost. A lot of people don't put opportunity cost into financial communication because it's very simple. If I have $100 and I can invest $100, and you've got something that's made me $10 a week, right? $100, this is going to make me $10 a week, but I've got to invest $60. However, over here, this item is going to make me $50 a week, but I have to invest $60. Obviously, I can't do both, right? So that one or the other is that opportunity cost. If I do this, I can't do that. So that's the thought process around opportunity cost. So when you're leveraged to the point that you can't do something else that might be profit generating, therefore it's a lost opportunity due to the accepting of this opportunity. Next is return on equity. So return on equity is important. Equity is something that you've earned. It's a value you've created through what you've done. It measures the return of a company is earning on shareholder equity investments. So it's a profit over a dollar of equity. So a profit, that is the money you have left, the net, after you subtract from the gross everything it costs to get there, over the dollar amount of equity. That's how you come up with that. That's return on equity. It's EBIT minus interest minus tax over equity. So when comparing company profitability in the same industry, assess whether a firm is generating or destroying shareholder value. This is when cost out is important. So you work at a company that has 20 locations. Every company has a lowest performer. That lowest performer needs to be measured by the same metrics that the other is measured by. Okay, so it can't be total production because the headcount here may be far less. And the profitability of the production here is far better. Let's think about being in the Midwest, up in Iowa or Illinois or somewhere like that. If you have a production firm in Iowa or Illinois, north of Kansas, it's kind of in a dead zone, meaning if they can't produce it there to supply it to that local market, then you have to ship it from way over here or way over there or way down there, being the East Coast, the West Coast, and Texas. And so living in Texas, being from Texas, when I fixed companies, I went up to the Midwest areas because if their production issues were significant, then the transportation costs to provide their customers what they needed or to provide raw goods to create the products that customer needed are severe. You can scoot up and down the East Coast fairly relatively cheap. You can scoot up and down the West Coast relatively cheap, and you can scoot back and forth in the South relatively cheap because those lanes are well documented. There's other stops you can make along the way. But as you head north and go through the Midwest and you're going up into Canada or out to Alaska, transportation costs much, much more because there's less options to get what you need. Ask the people in Alaska how much they pay to get dry goods or get the standard stuff we buy on Amazon every day. Tell them to show you the shipping on their Amazon bills, right? It's a completely different world. So that equity may mean something different. So when comparing profitability in the same industry, you have to assess whether a firm is generating or destroying shareholder value. Meaning, if there's not waste out streams, you may have a plant or a production facility or a restaurant or a store that is underperforming because they're not meeting their unit production or unit sales metrics. And that can impact this return on equity very severely. Even though their ROI might look good because it's a smaller facility, it may be much worse when you look at all three of these. And that's why you want to look at all three, because it gives you a better picture. So it can be misleading for companies with large excess cash balances since it does not deduct cash from the denominator in the calculation. I'll tell you this, there are a lot of huge companies that are cash rich that do awful things and waste tons because they're so cash rich. And what that means is their shareholders are getting shorted because they're not driving better process or better performance to process. So their shareholders, that money should be going back to the shareholders, it should be going back to the investors, or should be going into implementing new technology or better process moving forward. But instead it's just wasted because we got so much money, we're just gonna let it burn. That is a common practice. And when I go in as a consultant or I go in to fix a place, that's what I look for first is what is the waste? What does the waste stream look like? What are we burning? So that's what you have to look at. And the processes can be so deliberate and so jacked up that people think it's normal to throw good stuff, good material into the trash. And that's just like throwing money away. It's absolutely stupid. I see that all the time when I'm inspecting a place for the first time. And you go on third shift, you don't go on first, because on third shift, they're not buttoned up and you can catch it. On first shift, they have a way of hiding it because that's when all the leadership for the company visits, right? So that's where you find that. So the next is what to be aware of when you're talking about return on equity. A disadvantage is what we just talked about, could be misleading because it doesn't include the cash. But what you have to be aware of is it can be inflated for companies that are highly leveraged. It can also be artificially inflated by reducing equity balances. So just so you know, there's some mobility inside of ROE then there's not an ROI. I like ROI. It doesn't reflect complexities sometimes, including risk, but I think it's a truer form of measurement, at least a truer metric than ROE. So let's go to ROA, return on assets. This is a great way, especially for small companies, to assess their situation and assess their value. Return on assets measures the profitability in relation to total assets, and it indicates efficiency of an asset or asset utilization to generate earnings. Also, what goes into this return on assets is a natural depreciation schedule. So by the time you need something new, your asset should have been depreciated, which would have given you a tax value for depreciation inside of this return on assets. I like return on assets as a measurement just because it takes what's on hand and it says it is what it is, so measure it based on that, versus equity and risk that you're not measuring appropriately in the other things. So ROA equals EBIT minus interest minus tax over total assets. And you'll see that in the thumbnail if you want to review that at your leisure. When to use it: when assessing how effectively a company is converting its assets into income. One of the things I do, especially at big organizations, when I go over for the first time, I ask for an asset calendar. Give me a list of everything that's on the books as an asset for this location. You will be amazed at what you find. I went to a company one time. I only counted 60 trailers on the lot. We're talking about tractor trailers. I only counted 60 on the lot. When I looked at the asset list, they had 480. Of the 480, 260 were lost. They had no clue where these assets were. And if you think a total depreciated value for that number is $2,000 a piece, but a true value to replace them is between 6 and 10, think about the cash that's just out missing when it comes to those type of numbers. So that's something to think about when you're using assets. It's appropriate, and you want to shrink the assets to the size that the business needs. And that's what I did. I shrunk the assets by more than 300 units, and that business became profitable, and it turned the whole city of Dallas around for that company. It was fantastic. It was extremely quick. The savings was like $600,000 year over year in just asset management. And then when you have that kind of money, I was able to upgrade the plant, upgrade some other things. So then you had less employee injuries, less missed work because of that, better OSHA performance, better production, safer production, better quality production, because you weren't worried about all these things. It improved the entire city still to this day. So in assessing how effectively a company is converting its assets into income is when you're using that. Advantages is it can be used across industries, providing insights into how efficiently a company is using its assets to generate profits. It can be used across industries, so it doesn't matter what industry you're in, because every industry has an asset. You think about restaurants, they have kitchen assets, they have floor assets, tables and chairs, those are floor assets because they have to be replaced. And typically when you use a depreciation value or use a replacement value for taxes or for bankruptcies or for things like that, it gives you a solid figure that you can use for those items. Disadvantages of using the assets, return on assets, include depreciation, so it might be lower for capital intensive businesses. So depreciation, everything will depreciate, right? That's one piece that's a negative, but that is a normal, natural thing. So typically the way you view depreciation is this thing's going to last 6 years, so at year 7 I need to replace it, and then you can sell that as a depreciated value. A lot of times that could be a great income stream, selling old assets to put money back into the business, because no longer on the books is it taxed at the value. Now any money you get could be seen as profit and go back to your bottom line. I would put it back into new equipment or new technology. Then you don't have to worry about capital gains, and it then hits your bottom line in a better way by improving processes moving forward. And the last thing to be aware of when you're talking about return on assets is return on assets can be distorted by high asset balances, high depreciation expense, or for capital intensive businesses. So basically the assets, if you're making a lot of capital, if you're holding a lot of fat in that asset value, first off, get lean, sell them off. A business shouldn't be bigger than what it needs to. And that's the one thing I want to come across when you're reviewing this tab is no matter which measurement you use, things need to be the right size. Dress right, dress. So use things that are going to support the business in its functionality and make it run effectively and efficiency, but cut waste. And sometimes waste means you've got too much money tied up into assets. And when you have too much money tied up in the assets, those things have to be stored somewhere. And if they're stored in a production area, that can be can create blind spots. It can be a safety issue, which creates injuries. It can help hold dust in a warehouse. Sometimes it makes sense to get rid of good assets because they're frankly in the way and they're making you where you can't run a lean process. So that's the difference in those two returns: return on investment, return on equity, and return on assets. It's got some great information in that. This was by Joanna Label. She's an MBA CPA. I thought it was great, so that's why I took it and shared it here. You can follow her on LinkedIn, but this was a great piece of information, and it will be the thumbnail of the video. If you enjoyed this and subjects such as these, please subscribe. We are trying to grow our channel. I enjoy these things. I do it professionally, but also I do this out of enjoyment because I learn a lot from doing these things and teaching them to you. I'm Ben. I hope you have a great evening. Be good.